Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time, we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burroughs. Aunt Jenny and her sidekick Sasha have entered Patala, the realm of the Serpent Folk, and are about to approach the presence of the Dragon King. The hallway beyond the threshold at first seemed long, stretching out to another pair of doors that led into a brightly lit room beyond. But as she made her way down it, her head began to spin a little. The hallway seemed to shrink with each step, or her steps took her unexpectedly far down its length. In just a few paces, there she was at the threshold of the second doorway, stepping out into a magnificent garden or series of gardens. Above, the sky was a bright, glistening blue, the sun somewhere behind her. A few steps ahead, the official turned to look back over his shoulder before turning left and stepping behind a hedge. She started to follow quickly, but that set her head a-spin, so she moderated her pace and quickly enough turned the corner and found herself in a broad orchard of fruit trees of a myriad species, all flowering and fruiting. Behind her, Sasha muttered, "Who knew? It's bigger on the inside." There was furniture scattered among the trees of the orchard, couches, chairs, cushions, tables, cabinets, and wardrobes. The official led the way to one cluster. There, lounging upon a pile of cushions, was a large, multicolor feathered, snake-tailed fellow. Humanoid and sauroid folk were setting out food and drink on a large, low table before him, and another smaller one by his elbow. "Your Majesty," the official began in a loud or perhaps just emphatic voice, "comes now the Lady Jennifer, healer, scholar, and teacher, said to be the 12th and last Queen of Avalon, craving an audience with your august person." The king smiled a thin-lipped smile that was way too wide for his face. His skin was olive, his eyes unblinking, glistering gold, and at first Jenny thought he was wearing a royal blue feathered headdress, but as he moved, she realized it was just his plumage. His voice was soft, breathy, and throaty, with a hint of menace to it. "Welcome. Have a seat." He gestured expansively to the cushions, stools, and chaise lounges that surrounded the table before him. Aunt Jenny chose a chaise of the classic fainting couch variety. She doffed her shoulder bag and laid it down at the foot. Rudy immediately curled up at her feet, and Big Tom stretched out next to her, one paw and his head on her lap. Little Dickens scampered out of the bag, up over Tom, and nestled in her lap. "These are my companions, Sasha and 3, if it please your Majesty." As she was introduced, Sasha laid the palm of her flattened hand upon the pommel of the third sword and bowed before taking a seat on a large low stool. 3 grinned and scampered over to a large pile of cushions on the far side of the king from Aunt Jenny. "Scout," he said proudly. The guards that had escorted them arrayed themselves around the outside of the group, 2 keeping their gaze fixedly on Sasha, 2 on Jenny. No one said anything about Sasha being armed in the presence of the king. Perhaps he did not fear such things. Not here in his sunny garden, inside the palace, within the cavern in the side of the great hill of Patala. Someone set a small table with a tray of food on it within her reach. Aunt Jenny wasn't sure who. As she thought about it, she noticed that while there were a number of servitors setting things out and arranging them, she never noticed one enter or leave. They were just there with the things they bore with them, on the periphery of her attention. The tray contained fruit, nuts, cheese, what looked to be wine or fruit juice, a steaming pot of something, a plate with flaky tuna and salmon, and a small fork. She fed bits of fish to the cats in her lap and nibbled at a bit of slightly crumbly, sharp cheese. "What is it you wish to ask of us, Lady Jennifer?" asked the Serpent King in that soft, throaty accent of his. "It would seem that we have shared something of the same problem. Theft by she who was once a human," he completed. "Yes, she is often something of a nuisance." Jenny nodded in agreement. "Yes, I seem to find myself on a path to oppose her, one that is said to call for a number of artifacts. She has absconded with one of these, and if I am correctly informed, she has similarly made off with something of yours." He let out his breath in an angry hiss. His serpentine gaze was fixed on her as she spoke. "My hope is to replace what she has taken and to defeat her." Right. Defeat Lilith, mother of monsters, just as simple as that. "And you seek our aid in this?" "Yes, I had heard that she left your crown behind, damaged, its jewel removed." He glared, his thin lips pulled back to show his fangs. "In our case, it was the crown she stole," she continued. "And you seek its replacement?" "Well, I had hoped to perhaps borrow it and to strive to return the fairy crown and the serpent's eye to their rightful owners. I would, of course, return the serpent crown as well." "You will take on the false Rahab by yourself and retrieve our property?" "With assistance, that is what I hope. It seems to be the role being thrust upon me." He settled back into his cushions and fixed her with his gaze. After a bit, he gestured idly at the platter beside her and sipped from his own steaming cup. Aunt Jenny fed the cats more fish, made herself a small plate of fresh and candied fruits and cheeses, and poured a cup of what looked to be tea. It turned out to be a fruity herbal blend of rose hips, lemon, orange, and other less clearly defined floral and citrus fruit, along with anise, clove, black pepper, and similar spices she couldn't quite place. It was sharp, sweet, and spicy, and rather refreshing. Smiling without showing her teeth, she nibbled fruit and cheese and kept her eye on the king. "Everything's okay here. Just fine." Sasha was doing much the same. 3 was delighting himself eagerly, trying every fruit, nut, and cheese that was before him. "And you think you will succeed, Jennifer?" he asked after a considerable time. "I hope to. At the very least, it seems to be my task to try." "And you know how old and powerful she is? We are?" "My companion and I," Aunt Jenny nodded and raised her teacup in Sasha's direction, "we're just discussing that very thing. She, and you and your people, would seem to be ancient by our human reckoning. And to be truthful, I am not at all convinced that I can truly understand what power comes with such venerable age." "You cannot," he bit off. "Your folk were naught but annoying little mice. No, even mice did not exist yet when we strode the mortal earth, walked the path to the stars. How can you know?" "By analogy and science only, Your Majesty. Indirectly, we can reason and guess, but not know in our hearts and guts." "Curious little vermin have you hairy ones always been, scurrying about, your noses wriggling into everything. But you're bigger now. Some of you were even larger for a while, the more to scurry, prod, and poke into everything is who you are. He shrugged, but admitted, but somehow you make a strength of your curiosity, your peskiness. We strive, she nodded. I'm a librarian. I care for storehouses of books and knowledge, the products of our curiosity, and find the bits that are important when they are needed. I teach. I pass on the bits and the ways for discovering them, elaborating them. I suppose our vermin heritage, our curiosity and persistence, have stood us well. Perhaps they have. Enough for you to best her, thief and mother of monsters, she who has so often led your astray, so often fed upon yours? It seems that I am expected to try, and perhaps to succeed. I can only speak to the former, not the latter. I can guarantee to try, to persist. Success, well, that's in the future. I can hope and be curious. The king laughed a terrible, breathy laugh. It might be instructive to see. Interesting. You might teach us aught, even you fail. He leaned forward and steepled his taloned fingers, tapping the claws together. It just might. His smile was wide and wicked. And if I loaned you the crown, you would place your king's eye in it? Just now it is beyond my reach. Either we and our allies will retrieve it, or I will find a substitute. He scoffed a laugh. You would defeat her with a substitute in a substitute? She shrugged and sipped her tea. We are persistent, as you note. This time his laugh was heartier. Do you cajole kings often? Honestly, no. But dealings with kings and queens seem to be just one part of the role. She couldn't help but notice Sasha's eyes widen as she smiled with approval. Along with slaying lizard men and dragons? Asked the king. Only those that follow the false Rahab, mother of monsters, those who attack me. And where would you find a substitute? He asked. It was suggested with you, or the jinn, the titans, or giants. Is not to be found here. Perhaps the crown, I have not decided. It is all, though. Perhaps the jinn would help you. No love there for her. His talons kneaded the air before him. Very well. What do I have to do to convince you to loan me the serpent crown? Beyond the hope of returning it intact with the eye and fighting your fight against the false Rahab for you. Return the crown intact one way or the other, with the serpent's eye, if you can recover it, and with the king's eye or a substitute, if you cannot. After a pause, he added breathlessly, or die trying. That's fine with me. If you loan me the defaced crown, I will return it restored or with a suitable substitute. Do we have a deal then? The Serpent King eyed them long and long, then nodded curtly. Very well. It is a deal, Mouse Queen. A deal. Thank you, said Aunt Jenny. She fed several bites of fish to the cats, fetched a bit of jerky from her bag for Rudy, then sipped her tea and nibbled a bit of cheese. Your orchard is beautiful. It's one of my favorite rooms. He turned to one of the servitors and made a gesture before returning to his own food and drink. After a few minutes, the servitor, accompanied by a pair of liveried guards, returned bearing an iridescent silvery crown of intertwined snakes upon a pillow. "Ah," he said, "the crown." Aunt Jenny smiled and set her tea down. She picked up her bag and, shooing the cats to the foot of the chaise, set it next to her. From one of its compartments she fetched a large square of pale violet silk. "I use it to wrap my own circlet," she explained. She reached out her hands, covered in the silk, toward the servitor, who, somewhat nervously, balanced the cushion on one hand and with the other placed the crown upon the silk. "It's beautiful, even bare and defaced," said Aunt Jenny, holding it up for a closer inspection before folding it in the square and carefully setting it into one of the compartments of her bag. "I shall treat it with care." The Serpent King's glance flicked to little Dickens for a moment before he nodded with a thin smile. "I would hope so." They nibbled and sipped a bit more in silence. "I shall not keep you any longer from your mission," said the king. "You may go." He flicked his hand dismissively, and the honor guard made their way in toward the table. Aunt Jenny rose, as did Sasha and Three, set down her cup, picked up little Dickens, and settled her in the compartment of the bag. Setting the bag over her shoulder, she bowed to the king. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I trust that this will prove advantageous to us both." The king gave no response as she turned to follow the blue-clad official, animals at her feet, Sasha and Three a few steps behind, all of them surrounded by the honor guard. They retraced their steps back to Cat in silence. There they found the boat and the rumblers much as they had left them. A russet bird with long, fluffy yellow feathers and an even longer white tail sat on Cat's prow. "Make for Irem, Cat," said Aunt Jenny as they climbed on board, and soon the doughty little boat was making its way out of the cavern into the great mound of Patala. There were even larger crowds along the banks, both in the cavern and the town outside, all abuzz with gossip as they sailed downstream. Once they had passed through the great gates and were outside the mound, Cat had the rumblers hoist her sails, and soon they were speeding downriver. "Wow, that was—" exclaimed Sasha. "It certainly was," replied Aunt Jenny with a smile. "Was?" asked Three. "Beyond words," said Aunt Jenny. "Oh," he replied, and nodded knowingly. "Charming," muttered Sasha. "Aunt Jenny." "Yes, Cat, you have a message." "I do?" "The bird." Aunt Jenny stepped to the prow where the russet bird still perched. You have a message for me?" she asked the bird. It had been facing into the wind as Cat sailed downriver. It turned to look up at Aunt Jenny. "Yes," said the bird, and then continued in Morwenna's voice, "We're having the divil's own time fetching her or anything out. He has been tended and is better. It may be best to follow another plan." "Damn," said Aunt Jenny. And we shall look into other plans next time.